But yeah, I guess it makes sense to start now so we can use up all the time we have and leave time for questions at the end. So good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I hope you all had a good morning listening to the amazing panels we've had so far. And I'm excited to announce our second and final industry series of the day. So first off, I just want to thank Northeastern's Women in Finance organization for co-hosting this panel with us. So definitely make sure to check out their booth in the expo section afterwards. So I'm personally very excited to hear from this amazing lineup of women today discussing the impact investing industry. So with that, I'm happy to hand it over to today's moderator, Miranda Began, to introduce herself and all the panelists. So thanks, everyone.
Great. Thank you, Izzy. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining today's panel, which will highlight the perspectives and experiences of 3 women in the field of impact investing. My name is Miranda, as was mentioned, and I'll be moderating today's conversation with our panelists, Navjeet, Marjorie, and Laura. As many of you know, impact investing is a growing field, with each investor having their own thesis for how capital can be leveraged to drive positive impact for people, the environment, and society at large. As we work to recover from one of the greatest collective crises of our generation, the pandemic, it's more important than ever to ensure that investments are actively seeking to address structural and institutional inequities globally. These inequities have only become more glaring as we've seen the vastly uneven distribution of the negative health and economic impacts of COVID-19. Now and in the years to follow, it will be more important than ever that impact investment dollars be leveraged to deliver economic justice, address systemic racism, and improve outcomes for all by investing in those with the largest structural barriers to economic mobility and well-being, both in the US and globally. These are some of the challenges that I seek to address in my work at Third Sector, where we advise government agencies on how to more effectively leverage public taxpayer dollars to improve outcomes. Some of these outcomes are things like job placement and retention, access to quality and timely healthcare, educational and credential attainment, reduced justice system involvement, and stable housing access, among others. As a Northeastern alum, a very proud Northeastern alum, I'm excited to be moderating this conversation and hope that you all will gain some new perspectives on the field of impact investing and where the field is headed through the firsthand experiences of 3 women in impact investing, Marjorie Winfrey, Navjeet Ball, and Laura Metcalf. Before we turn it over to the panelists, I just want to encourage everyone to drop questions into the chat box throughout the session. We'll have time for audience Q&A at the end, and we may not get to every question, but we will try our best. There will also be an opportunity to kind of live ask questions at the end too, so if you prefer that, we'll try and incorporate a few of those as well. So now let's turn it over to the panelists to introduce themselves. Maybe I'll first hand it over to Navjeet, and if you could kind of start us off by telling us a bit about yourself, your role, and sort of the mission statement of your firm to get us started.
Great, happy to do so, Miranda. Thank you for that, and it's such a pleasure to be on this panel with Marjorie and with Laura. Laura and I have had the benefit of knowing each other for a few years now. In fact, Laura is the one who hired me in social finance. So I'm just, it's a pleasure.
Ever.
It's just a pleasure to be here with both of them. So my name is Navjeet Ball. I'm Managing Director and General Counsel at Social Finance, Inc. Social Finance is a nonprofit based in Boston. We have about 75 employees here in Boston, but also in Austin, Texas, and San Francisco, California. The organization was founded back in 2011, co-founded by Sir Ron Cohen, David Blood, and our CEO, Tracy Palangian. And we're part of a global network together with Social Finance UK, Israel, India, and the Netherlands. And Social Finance really did, together with Third Sector, Miranda, pioneer the social impact bond here in the United States. So I thought I'd tell you a little bit more about my personal background, and then happy to sort of see how that fits into the social finance story and mission. So I'm a lawyer by training. I did my law school at Northeastern, so I'm a proud graduate of the Northeastern Law School, and practiced law for over 20 years at a couple of major law firms in Boston, focusing on tax-exempt bond financing, so infrastructure financing with governments across New England and the Northeast. I also spent 4 years in government. I was the head of the Department of Revenue for Governor Deval Patrick from 2007 through 2011, so have both a public and a private sector background. And when I was back in the private sector after having been in government for 4 years, I actually represented Massachusetts when it did its first 2 social impact bonds. So Miranda, I worked very closely with John Grossman and George Oberhauser back in 2013, I think it was, on the first social impact bond with ROCA, and also represented Massachusetts in the Mahasa project to deal with addressing chronic homelessness here in the Commonwealth. And so I got really intrigued by this sort of new way of thinking about bringing together private and public capital to address hard social problems, but in an evidence-based, data-driven way. And that's really the mission of social finance itself. It's the mission statement is to mobilize capital to drive social progress. We work with the public, private, and social sectors to really drive resources towards results, applying the core principles of pay for success across a suite of tools that really enhance economic opportunity for low-income folks. The pay for success principles that we focus on include clearly defined outcomes, data-driven decision-making, creating what we call uncommon cross-sector partnerships, so bringing together government, philanthropy, social service providers, as well as private impact investment capital, creating strong governance and accountability structures, which is really important for the long-term success of these projects, and for creating learnings out of these projects, and looking to the private sector for really impact-first investments. And we implement these across 3 main strategies, including career impact bonds, social impact bonds, and our public sector practice or advisory practice with government. As the managing director and general counsel, I'm part of the senior management of the organization, and really help to run the organization and help set its strategic goals. So that's a little bit about me and a little bit about social finance. Back to you.
Navjeet, for that introduction. Maybe I'll turn it over to Laura now to give us more of a background in your role.
Yeah, absolutely. And as Navjeet mentioned, I spent, almost 5 years at Social Finance, and it's such a wonderful organization. So and I feel like every panelist does something a little bit different in the impact investing world. So I really love this combination today of all these amazing women. So I'm Laura Metcalf. My day job is CFO, COO of The Engine, which is an early stage impact fund that was developed by MIT and spun out back in 2017. Our first fund was about 205 million. We closed our second fund on Wednesday at 260 million. So it's very exciting. Tough year to raise money in COVID, and we can talk about that later maybe. So we're approaching 500 million under management. The engine was created because there was a gap, and I think a lot of impact investing stories often have the same kind of creation story, that somehow there is a gap that exists in the capital markets somewhere, and we think about ways to fill that. And so for the engine, it was basically there was a lack of capital to commercialize really important technologies that were being developed in universities, but having a hard time leaving the university lab. And so the Engine's mission is to help tough tech founders commercialize breakthrough science and engineering that solves big global problems. So we focus on a lot of climate mitigation. So that could be electrification, it could be decarbonization. If you were watching Chronicle on TV the other night, they did a really nice focus on 2 of our companies. One that is backed by Bill Gates's Breakthrough Energy Ventures called Boston Metal, that is green steel, because steel is one of the biggest sources of carbon. If we have folks that are focused on climate, probably know. And then another group was focused on using chemicals developed from ocean life to make better and safe. That seems like, oh, is that really impact? And so we should talk about that too, because everyone's definition of impact is different. But it turns out that a lot of the sunblocks and cosmetics that we use are killing the coral in our oceans. And so it actually does have a massive positive environmental impact. The second vertical is human health, life sciences, biotech. We do sustainable food and ag in that too. How do we keep our food systems safer and more productive? And then the third category is what we call advanced systems that help the world work better. And that could be, we just made a really interesting investment in a company called the Routing Company, for instance, which is using AI algorithms on a massive scale, though, to tie public transit systems into last mile transit like Uber, Lyft, et cetera, to create more efficient, more equitable transit systems at no additional cost for riders, and actually can reduce the number of cars time. So all kinds of benefits, from social equity to environmental positive impact there. So we invest from kind of pre-seed to Series A. I guess one thing I would love to share is that diversity is a major issue in all financial markets, and certainly in venture capital, it has really lagged. And so we have a big focus on diversity. 40% of our companies have a female founder on their team. 72% have a female executive or board member. 80% of our companies have a founder that is a minority, and 60% of those are from a underrepresented group. So we're really proud of that. We don't think it's enough. We're really leaning in and trying to do more there, but I think that's really part of our ethos. I'll pivot for one quick second and just mention I am also really involved with as a venture partner in a company called the Social Entrepreneurs Fund. And that is a small family of impact funds that focuses on making B2B software and SaaS investments in technologies that help increase access and economic opportunity for low to moderate income people. And the current fund is focused on US and Americans. And so those types of investments might be financial inclusion. We do a lot of work around improved credit algorithms, because the way that the credit system in the US has worked for a long time has really shut out 80 to 100 million people from having access to credit. And then that, of course, can push them into payday loans and other types of really unfair markets. I mean, it's expensive to be poor in America. And so TSEF, which is what we call the Social Entrepreneurs Fund, TSEF, really focuses on trying to figure out ways that technology can help break down those barriers. And so I feel really lucky that I get to still invest on one side and help build hopefully a really important organization at the engine on the other side of my life.
Thanks so much, Laura, for that overview of all the work that you do. We're really excited to kind of dig in a little bit more in our next section on sort of the investment strategy and the way you all approach impact. But last but not least, would love to hear from Marjorie a little bit about what you do at Wellington and how your role is advancing sustainable investing.
Sure. So I have to sort of laugh, because the world of impact investment, the world of finance in Boston is small, but the world of impact investment in Boston is very small, and it's not 6 degrees of separation. It's like 1 or maybe 2, and we have Tracy Plingen as a Wellington alum, so started social finance, and we've had others go to third sector as well. So there's a lot of kind of cross-pollination of ideas and people. And I'll say one part of my extracurriculars, or the fun things I get to do at Wellington, is to work with our charitable foundation. And part of what we're doing right now is exploring impact investments, and some of these vehicles that Navjeet was just describing are among the most interesting, the ones that align best with the mission of our foundation, which is to support education outcomes for youth in communities where Wellington has a presence. And I do want to just quickly share that my career path is very circuitous and a bit strange. I was a Russian studies major and worked in international development in the former Soviet Union for 5 years before I went to business school. And the reason I went to business school was because of one conversation in one focus group where a woman turned to me and she switched from speaking Uzbek to speaking Russian because she knew that I would understand. And she said, "Tell the Americans thank you. Tell them we wouldn't need your help if we just had jobs." And from that moment forward, I've never been able to forget that conversation or the feeling that I had, which was that it is so intuitive, it is so clear that if capital is moved to the right places, it can catalyze tremendous change and really empower people in ways that it doesn't take any thinking. There's no risk in empowering people, and so we consistently, in my mind, overestimate the risk of putting capital into these communities that are vulnerable or off the beaten track. And Lara's example of private equity and women is a great one where, again, there's all this potential and we're just not taking advantage of it. So I'll share very briefly that Wellington's mission is client firm self. And so everything we do is meant to create value for our clients. Clients want more sustainable investment solutions. The firm can perform better if we understand the value of investing in sustainability. And for those individuals like myself and Tracy Palangin, who had to leave Wellington to fulfill her sort of purpose mission, we can leverage our skills in finance and our purpose orientation if we're able to sort of focus on this area. And within the sustainable investment group, our kind of mission for our smaller group is to partner, invest, engage. So again, with the clients kind of at the center, how can we partner with clients to design solutions within this ecosystem where, Lara and Navjeet are also active kind of in different points, but also trying to design solutions that, again, move capital to places where it hasn't been effectively moved through the traditional finance vehicles that we have. And again, to drive value through our traditional investment experience, through our multidisciplinary research platform, and to engage with companies to improve transparency, to cross-pollinate ideas, and increase the pace of progress. And the last thing I'll say is that back to this point on the very small world, Izzy Spiegel was one of the standout co-ops that I've had the privilege of working with, and she's one of several NU Impact members that we've seen come through the firm. So I'd say it's a lucky opportunity and a great occasion to be here. So I'm excited to be part of this panel.
Thanks, Marjorie, and thank you all for those introductions and kind of getting us started on kind of hearing some of these key topics and trends. I think you started to get into some of the meat before even asking some of the questions. So I think that gives us a good place to start. So just to kind of give folks a heads up as to where we'll be headed for the next few sections. We're going to first talk a little bit about industry landscape and trends, and then from there we'll jump to kind of discussing the panelists' experiences in the field and particularly anything that has stood out as women in the field of impact investing. So from the conversation that we started to have through the intros, I think we heard a little bit from Navjeet and Lara about sort of what sustainable investing at your respective organizations looks like and sort of how you all define impact. And opening this up to everybody, but I think in particular, Marjorie, would love to hear a little bit about how you all approach that at Wellington, but then also from the rest of the panelists as well.
Sure. So all of our investment strategies are non-concessionary. So the impact portfolios all seek to deliver financial performance by investing in businesses that contribute to social, environmental, economic outcomes. And it's a thematic framework. So Lara was highlighting a bunch of sustainable investment themes. Those are consistent with what we have in our global impact portfolio. They were developed pre-SDG, but are largely aligned with the SDGs as well. And I'd say our approach is research-led, and hinges on three basic requirements. So this originally, I think, came from the GIN definition, but we look for materiality. So businesses have to have a core products and services focus on solving problems that relate to the impact themes. That means greater than 50% in all of our impact strategies. They need to have additionality, which means that there needs to be something unique about the way that they're solving those problems that is not found in competitors or peers. And we need to be able to reliably measure those outcomes. So it's those investment returns alongside contributions, and it has to be measurable. To me, it's investing, it's using capital to make the world a better place. So very simply, what problem does this solve and who benefits are the core questions that we need to ask. And increasingly, we've been focused on what are the attributes of the business that might be problematic. So that's also consistent with a lot of kind of emerging trends in the space, which I'm sure we'll get to later.
Thanks, Marjorie. Laura and Navjeet, do you have anything you would want to share about the way you all define impact at your organizations?
I'm happy to jump in, or Navjeet, if you want to go first.
You go first, Laura.
Okay. I think that so we're very aligned, I think, with Marjorie. We also are strongly believe that for many types of investment, you can actually pursue top tier financial returns alongside measurable positive impact. And so that is absolutely our goal. And there's actually a really nice industry association now that has popped up to kind of help amplify this. It's called Impact Capital Managers. It's a nonprofit, but that's a great place if there are people on here looking for jobs in impact investing. Go to the Impact Capital Managers website and kind of scroll down below the fold, and they have all their members there. And so that gives you a good sense of lots of different types of firms that are focused in this area. So I would just say the interesting thing about the engine, though, is that we are set up as a B Corp. And so from a fund perspective, we're, top tier returns, measurable positive impact. But then because our management company is set up as a B Corp, we also have regional economic development and some other goals that go alongside of this. And so we actually have 25,000 feet of space in Central Square that we have our portfolio with us, but we also invite others to become residents there if we think that we can help them by being part of our community. And we spend a lot of time on networking and introducing them to big industrials. And in 2022, that will actually expand to 150,000 square feet at 750 Main Street in Kendall Square. So lots of lab space, specialized equipment. Again, this is in helping the founders leave the university to kind of commercialize their product. We had to actually make sure they had access to the specialized equipment that often only universities have. And so within our B Corp mission, we do try to do a lot of community outreach, a lot of development around jobs. And right now we're going through a process to say, okay, now we're 4 years old. In the beginning, it's always hard. You're a startup organization. You're just trying to make sure you can get, you can get yourself started. But now we're getting to a point where it's becoming a more expansive vision, and we're really trying to think about how can we lean in even more to job creation and job creation in the areas of, at least starting with Massachusetts, where those jobs are the most needed. And so it's interesting. That won't be. When we think about measuring impact, we think about it on two levels. One, at what's the impact we have as a firm? And then, of course, what's the impact we have through supporting our portfolio companies? So really, what's the impact our portfolio investments will have? And happy to go deep.
So I would say a couple of things. One, in Marjorie's small world, to further that, the building that you guys are building out, Laura, is where Polaroid used to be there, and my father-in-law used to work there. He was a VP of resource, because my husband and I were driving by there, and I was like, oh, I think that's where Laura's going to be. So
that's so funny. Yeah, I mean, actually, that's the cool thing about Cambridge, right? There's such roots,
Yeah, I mean, 50 years ago, Polaroid was like the tech company, the new tech company. So it's pretty cool. So I would say social finance is probably a slightly different focus than what both that Marjorie and Laura just outlined, we're definitely more of an impact first organization in terms of when you're thinking about impact versus returns. And there's actually a really interesting article in today's New York Times. Brisbane just came out with a report on kind of trying to get away from the dichotomy of, are you impact driven or are you return driven, and sort of find this middle ground. So happy to circulate that later if people want to take a look at that. But so I would say we're definitely in the impact first, and our projects returns are sort of intensely tied to impact. In other words, we don't get returns unless we hit the impact that we've described at the beginning. And it might be helpful if I give a couple of examples. So we did a social impact bond with the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, where the state was interested in scaling up the work that is being done by Jewish Vocational Service, JVS, in providing English language and occupational skills training for recent refugees and immigrants. Laura knows this project well, and so we launched the project back in it was February of 2017, which was auspicious timing because it was as then President Trump was implementing his first Muslim ban and other reducing the number of refugees coming into the country, and that's when we launched. And we had just all of our investors stayed with us. No one backed out, even in the face of sort of a lot of political swirl. So what that project has done over the last 3 or 4 years is provide English language training and occupational skills training for up to 2,000 refugees and immigrants. And the thing that we've been measuring using the state's own administrative data is whether people are making more money a year after they've completed their training with JVS than they were a year before. And the project has actually done really well, and early returns indicate that we have hit our metrics. The Commonwealth has made outcome payments based on those success metrics that we've measured over the last 4 years. And we actually maxed out, as they say, on in terms of the contract, the amount that the Commonwealth was going to pay. So that's an example of how we very closely tied the impact, which is folks making more money, to the Commonwealth making payments that went to pay back our original investors. The Career Impact Bond is another example, and that's more recent for us. And this is really looking at raising impact investment capital. We've raised a fund, our first fund, to help support, to pay the tuition costs for folks going through certification programs, so not 2 or 4 year college programs, but people who are trying to upskill to be able to get a better job in the workplace, in the workforce, sorry. So we cover their upfront tuition costs, and then they start making payments once they start earning enough money in a job in their field. They hit certain income thresholds, they will actually make a payment back as a percentage of their income for a set period of time. So again, we're tying any returns that we get into the fund based on the outcomes of these folks. The work that goes into putting one of these projects together is pretty intense, as you might imagine. We think a lot about what are the right training providers, what are the right areas, is it IT, is it certified nursing programs, and then making sure that at the core of it, that we're protective of the students. This is not meant to put an undue burden on anyone who's trying to get a better start in life. And so we have a student bill of rights that's actually at the core of all of our agreements, that really tries to protect students and their experience in making these repayments. So we launched about a year and a half ago. So we're to Laura's point, in a COVID impacted economy, keeping our fingers crossed to see how things start to play out. But again, I think the difference there is that we're really tying our returns to the achievement of those impacts.
Thank you all for sharing a little bit more kind of detail around the way you all think about impact at your respective organizations. And I think there were a couple of things that came up, I think, related to this question and some of the comments you all already shared. But I think what might be helpful to hear a little bit from you all is, I think, particularly, now as we've seen, the kind of significant disparities along racial lines within, the U.S. And I think in other countries as well. Would love to hear a little bit about how your respective firms really consider equity, and particularly racial equity, as a component of the impact you seek to achieve. I think one area that we've thought about at Third Sector a lot is sort of who's involved in deciding what is an impact metric and how impact is defined, and making sure that that definition can be determined in an inclusive way. But would love to hear a little bit from you all. And I know Laura, so I don't know if you want to kick us off, and then we can go from there.
Sure, I'm happy to, and I can be brief because I think I already, shared some of our metrics, which again, we are proud of, but we do not think are enough. There's just more work to do in this area. So I think the interesting thing is when you raise a fund, so I'm responding to Miranda, to your kind of suggestion of inclusivity and setting impact metrics, because I do agree that is wonderful if you can do that. And there's a quote I'll probably mess up, but I'm going to try it anyways. It's something like that which you do without us, you do to us. So people, I think communities need to be involved, right, in setting these metrics. But that said, when you raise a fund, you have to go out to a group of LPs with an investment thesis, and you have to kind of set a lot of that up front. So I think that we don't unfortunately have the luxury of doing that at either the Social Entrepreneurs Fund or the Engine. And so for us, and including diversity. So I think that becomes much more in how we run our processes in-house. And so I would say at the Engine, absolutely, when we kick off an investment process, I think we think about similar to kind of the way the impact management program thinks about kind of impact through the different processes, or the IFC operating principles too, looking at impact, in your sourcing. Are you sourcing in a way that is not a closed network, but you are open to receiving ideas from diverse sources, diverse people? Is your screen unbiased? And so, making sure that's happening. When you get in to discuss, after your first meeting, we actually are, and we've been tweaking this a little bit, but are we capturing diversity data then, and impact data? That's definitely, is it a big market, and what's the impact? Is the impact going to be enough? And then obviously once you make an investment, helping those founders kind of stay on track. And we really are looking for kind of the collinear, financial success is going to grow with impact success and vice versa. But for us, I think the diversity piece really comes in the most at that top of the funnel. And how do you make sure you have a broad top of the funnel? I'll just mention quickly at the Social Entrepreneurs Fund, I think similar process, trying to make sure we are looking broadly at the top of the funnel. But I would say that because our impact is very specific around wanting to help low to moderate income Americans, LMI populations, we absolutely look very deeply at, okay, if this product or service is successful, is it going to help lift a group of people, out of poverty, or give them more economic access? So it doesn't mean they have to be, so it doesn't mean that a product has to be solely serving that population. So an example might be Petal Card, PETAL. It's a credit card that, rather than using FICO scores to determine whether someone's credit worthy, they actually use, they put an API on your bank account and look at your cash flow in and out, because there are lots of low-income people who are very good at paying their bills, but they are not being, but the bills that they're paying might not be being picked up in FICO scores. And so, but when we looked at Petal and made a decision to invest, we really spent a lot of time talking about who are the populations you're going to focus on. And a lot of that is are they diverse populations, which they were, and are you going to make sure that a certain percentage of your client base has no credit score or is subprime credit? And so that's been something we continue to track with them. Now they also get people who are going to Harvard, but come from a country where there's no credit information coming. So they also get some very they might get some very wealthy people for this card as well. And that's okay. It's not like it has to be only focused on the low income population or the diverse population, but we want to make sure that when we make an investment that the intent is there. And then as they grow, they continue to track those metrics.
Thanks, Laura. Navjeet, did you want to speak to your question?
Sure, happy to. So, excuse me, sorry about that. I think the way in which we think about diversity and the impact that we're having is to really think about the data that we're gathering. And we've done some interesting work internally over the last few months, thinking about what kind of data do we gather, or who gets to decide what kind of data we gather, who gets to look at it, and what do they do with it? So some really interesting introspection, thinking about those types of questions. We, in our public sector practice, where we work directly with governments as essentially in a consulting relationship, we work with, sort of helping them understand too, what's the administrative data showing, what are their goals in terms of, reaching different people and different groups of folks. So we're trying to make it much more part of just the kind of the DNA of our work. I think we've got a long way to go, but it's a very active discussion really across all of the work that we do now, which is terrific. It's great. It's great that we're bringing that kind of rigor to it.
Definitely have seen, I think, at Third Sector, the role of data and just starting to look at racial disparities is sort of the first step, because you can't manage what you're not measuring or looking at. So yeah, I definitely echo that. Yeah, Marjorie, is there anything that you would want to add around sort of the way you all think about equity and racial equity and sort of your role at Wellington?
Sure. I mean, I agree. It's obviously become much more prominent in this year. I've talked about racial equity more than I have probably in the 20 years preceding, in all aspects of my life. And I would say at the firm, we're talking about it, about racial equity within the firm and how to hire and retain and develop and promote talent. And we've launched an initiative to have a diverse founders fund that will be focused on underrepresented groups and businesses coming out of underserved communities. And within the impact funds, we've also been talking about a lot, but again, the conversation is bubbling up from all channels and all sides. So clients and asset owners are looking to allocate their capital differently. Corporates are aiming to support their workforces and retain their customers and their license to operate. And realize that racial equity is part of that. Asset managers like ourselves are trying to discern patterns and invest capital based on what we see. We're getting different data. The EEO1 conversation was not one that we were having 2 years ago, and now we're talking about it every day. Everybody knows what that means when they talk to their companies, or at least U.S. companies. We're saying, can we see this data? And then what do we do with it? And then governments and regulators are creating policies that explicitly call out a just transition, and they're explicitly sort of referencing, again, terms and ideas that we didn't talk about 5 or 10 years ago. And the data providers are finding their place in terms of filling this need for consistent standardized data and analytics. So, I mean, I think it's a huge opportunity. I think we're at the early stages. And one thought that I had is just that evolution, in my mind, is such a big kind of part of the sustainable investment space. When I joined Wellington 10 years ago, we didn't have the group that I'm in now. We didn't have the role that I'm in now. And now it will be more people. The group is definitely not getting smaller, and our remit is getting bigger. But again, the ideas are diffuse, and so it's not just that we talk about diversity, equity, inclusion on the global impact team. The whole firm is talking about it. The traditional investment teams are talking to their managements about it because they realize it's actually a material consideration. And so I think in terms of metrics, I'm so envious when I hear Navjeet talk about what kind of data could be collected, because we have to take a much more indirect approach. And I would never, wearing my measurement hat, I would never have access to customers or residents in an affordable housing investment. There's no way that I could get that type of data, but it would be amazing. And so we have to often just use proxies, which I think, again, to some of Lara's comments, you can get to some meaningful kind of trends and patterns and information, but it's most definitely, not participatory, and we're not polling the communities to really understand their needs. What we can do is ask the companies to have that be more top of mind. And I will say, from company management discussions, we do hear, I sometimes refer to this CEO that kept us on the phone for an extra 30 minutes because he wanted to talk about how sort of tortured he is thinking through providing a living wage and a decent quality of life for the lowest paid workers in his company, and that it's not actually about the wage, it's about the whole community and infrastructure in the cities and towns where they have plants. And that's sort of that's a set of conversations that they're not used to having either. So we're early in this, but in the spirit of evolution, I think we can make a huge amount of progress.
I definitely appreciate that reflection, Marjorie. And I think specifically kind of like figuring it out together in partnership with the, the organizations and companies you're invested in. I feel like that's, the key thing that I think will need to happen is just more of these conversations, continuing to have these conversations, and answers will start to come. But we're so early in a lot of these conversations, as you mentioned. So just a quick reminder for folks, feel free to keep adding questions to the Q&A. We'll have some time for that in a few minutes here. But before we opened up to the Q&A, I want to spend a little bit of time kind of hearing directly from the panelists around sort of their experiences as women in the impact investing field, knowing that I think, the field of finance more broadly is, generally, more male dominated, and I think there have been, challenges around, gender diversity within the finance space, and, wanting to hear a little bit about what you all have seen kind of trend-wise within impact investing. Are there differences between, traditional institutional finance and impact investing, and sort of the leadership roles that women are playing, and any kind of trends that you see kind of in the future for this space, and sort of the role that women will continue to play in it. Marjorie or Navjeet, do you want to kick us off?
Happy to do so. I think my experience has been you'll see more women and women in positions of leadership in the impact investing space. It was interesting. I was at there's an impact investment lawyers working group that actually has a annual conference based out of NYU now. And I was at that conference a couple years ago, back in the before times when we actually went to conferences in person. And I remember being really struck. It's about 500 lawyers from all over the world actually focused on impact investing, and a lot of major law firms represented. And I was in a breakout session on fund creation, and I was really struck by the number of men in the room, and in particular, like men from, partners from major law firms. And I thought, oh, well, now I know that impact investing is really a thing, right? Because it's not just women sitting around talking about it. It's also the guys are into it too. So I think it's great to have both men and women. I do think that the impact space has, maybe more opportunity for women. And it's been one of the joys of my life to meet so many incredible women in this space. Lara or Marjorie?
I see some of the same things. So, a 15-year kind of career in finance, I haven't had many women on my team until I focused exclusively on sustainable finance and impact investing. And now we have the head of my group, Wendy Cromwell, is a very dynamic woman leader, and the head of our impact fund at Tara Stillwell is also a dynamic and impressive woman leader, and it's an amazing privilege to get to work with them. But I will also say, in terms of mentorship, people often talk about kind of looking for women mentors. I didn't ever feel like not having women as my direct managers was an impediment. But I do feel like, I do think that in some ways the impact investment field and sustainable investment can appeal to a broader group of women. The other thing I will say that I've noticed is that I think that I see more women filter themselves out of careers in finance where they might actually be really strong contenders, impact sustainability aside. I've seen people sort of put this bar of like a career in finance means that I have to be number one in my econometrics class, or I need to be number one in my advanced calculus class in college. And the reality is there are many math nerds in finance, and most of us don't do any calculus ever. And so I think I would like to see everybody kind of take that filter off, but also be more sensitized to moments where it's a gendered kind of view that we are applying. Either candidates are applying to themselves or we're applying to them. And so the roles oftentimes aren't as demanding as we might like to make them sound. And for the candidates coming in, the expectation in an advanced calculus class in a university, a leading university, is going to be harder than the math that you're going to be asked to do in 90% of jobs. And so for anybody listening here who thinks they might not be stellar at math because you're not at the top of your class, please take off that filter and keep applying for the roles.
It's a great point, because I ended up in finance, but I think I got a C- when I took calculus in high school, and then luckily was able to take it again in college and got an A, and then never took it again. And so I was a finance and information systems major at BC a million years ago. But like, I agree. And I had a 20-year Wall Street career before I pivoted to impact. Super great advice. When I started that role, I was one of very few women in my analyst class. I was one of very few women on the trading floor. The trading floor was not a great place back then. Literally, for somebody, the head trader's birthday, they had a stripper dressed as a homeless person come on in the middle of the day, and kind of, that was like acceptable behavior back then. So thank goodness those days are over. And that's terrible on two levels, right? Like, making fun of homeless people is not and obviously the other half of it. So yeah. Thank God those days are over. And I think there are lots more women in leadership and power. And I think, unfortunately, sometimes women self-select out of some of the roles. If maybe they're better at kind of figuring out, what do I want to live a balanced and happy life, rather than having just a purely like, I just want to get to the next career point. And so I think that the other thing I would actually maybe bring in the generational thing here too. I love millennial and Gen Y people and workers because they bring such passion to the job. I also have nieces that age, and my son's a junior in college. And sometimes this is exactly what I want to do. And and I'm going to only go get the first job in exactly this thing. And I think some of the coaching I do to those folks in my family are, absolutely, it's so great that you want to be an impact investor. But you may not get there with job one. So kind of think about, how do you get there? And at the end of the day, impact investing is investing. And so having some of the skills, and there are many routes in though, right? And Navjeet's, your route is very different. You came at it from the legal kind of contracting side. So Navjeet still has to understand the the financial aspects of the transaction, but she doesn't have to build the model, right? She's actually going to figure out how you make it work on paper, right? How to, and somebody else might come at it from the model side. Somebody else might come at it from the how do we get these stakeholders together side. Like these are all important roles in impact investing. So I think that if you start to learn about the jobs and think about where you want to end up, and then don't worry if you don't get their first job, right? I think, so I'm a little bit off topic, but I just felt like, yeah, Marjorie, you kind of triggered that for me when you were talking about, let's get more women in finance. I agree.
Yeah, Laura, thank you so much. I think you actually sort of segued perfectly into sort of the next section, which I think is the open Q&A. And we've had some questions come in, I think in particular, just wanting to hear some advice from you all as you, sort of talk to some, potential new graduates that are interested in entering the impact investing space, what skills maybe to look for in entry-level roles or sort of any other advice, that you would kind of give to somebody who's kind of hoping to start out in this field. Navjeet, did you want to jump in with some answers?
Sure, I'm happy to start. So I think for folks coming maybe right out of college, which is what I'm assuming you're talking about, Miranda, I think it's a little bit to Laura's point. I do think it's important to get the basic skills that you need, and when I talk to, for example, people in law school who want to go into impact work, I always say to them, well, just go work at a big firm and learn the hard skills, like learn how to be a really good lawyer, or go work at an investment bank and learn how to be a good banker, like understand how money works. And then you can start to figure out, what part of the growing impact investing field you want to go into. Do you want to be in public equities? Do you want to be in private? You want to be in fund management? There's, many different ways to get into this, but it's important to understand how, and I always tell people too, different kinds of money work in different kinds of ways, right? So people trying to invest in the public markets have certain goals that they're trying to achieve. Public money works very differently. The government dollars have a lot of flexibility, but also a lot of requirements that come with them. So understanding how government dollars works is also really important. Philanthropic dollars work very differently as well. So there's all these different kinds of, all the dollars are green, but they all work very differently. And it's important to understand that in order to know sort of what's your entry point. Where do you want to kind of make your mark? And I think if you look at just the three of us on this panel and yourself, Miranda, you can change, to Laura's point. You don't just have to do one thing for the rest of your life. You can really kind of hopscotch a little bit around to try different ways of being involved in impact investing, which is really fun, actually.
Marjorie, do you want to jump in with any advice?
Sure, I would just say I totally agree that career paths maybe are better, not super linear, and there's a lot about kind of building blocks, especially in the space, because you can't just build models. You have to be able to think more holistically. You have to be able to understand kind of broader dynamics and the whole ask. I think the biggest sort of focus area for me in the last year has been thinking in an ecosystem and life cycle context. So before we used to say this business lowers CO2 emissions, so it's good. Now we have to think, does it have a sustainable supply chain? Are they sourcing materials in a way that avoids conflict areas? Are they ensuring that there's no use of the products or services that's going to harm people? We have to ensure that the employees are being treated fairly and that the executives have appropriate kind of accountability and incentives. And so I think, again, having a broader context really just helps you be able to do that naturally and intuitively rather than having to force kind of a checklist on things and be mechanical about it. But I would say I kind of have three words that I like to think of in sort of a cycle where you need one thing to get to the next phase. But I think of it also in terms of what you kind of need to have in your head and what managers need to have, like as a candidate, if I'm looking for a job right out of school or if I'm hiring somebody for a role. I think people need courage to imagine. People need curiosity to ask the question or to inquire or pursue something. And people need connectivity to chart a course. So courage to imagine like what is possible, curiosity to actually take the step and start to explore, and then the connectivity to know whether or not you're on the right path. So I need to rely on Navjeet and Lara and Miranda to figure out if I'm in the right place to answer the questions that I have. And really, especially in this space, I don't think anybody can go it alone. And it's really that kind of network and relationships with people are sort of the roadmap or the tool for creating a career GPS. And really, I mean, I like metaphors, clearly maybe see a little bit kind of too many connections where they don't exist, but I do think you could think about this in terms of an individual career, but I think it's the same for organizations as we think about how to tackle sustainability issues, and for the broader sustainable investment community, kind of in concentric circles expanding out.
This emphasis on connectivity and relationships, I think it's like the conversation we're having today is just a great example of that. I know we don't have a ton of time left here, and I saw another question in the Q&A just about the reflection, Marjorie, that you shared around sort of your realization around being interested in this space of impact investing, and curious if Navjeet or Lara, if you have any sort of moments that you recall in kind of the early stage in your journey here in impact investing that you might want to share with the audience.
I mean, honestly, probably some of mine are with Navjeet. I mean, I think I said in the chat to somebody, my first jump from kind of Wall Street to impact was I read one of Professor Muhammad Yunus's books. I don't know if it was Banker to the Poor or one of the Conscious Capitalism or something. And I just had this moment of like, yeah, why aren't we using capital to drive outcomes? And why aren't we have all these fancy tools we use to express views on commodities and things like, why? There's got to be a way to actually use those types of things to drive positive outcomes. And so that was really the start of my exploration. And I did some microfinance stuff, and I ended up working at the Kennedy School before I arrived at social finance, and it helped build that organization with Tracy, with Navjeet, and with Jay. But and which was such rewarding work. But Navjeet, how many times were we sitting around a conference room table after working on something for 9 months already, and we were less like, and we'd get out of a meeting and it like seemed like it was dying, and be like, all right, every deal dies 1,000 deaths before you get it done, and really just having the persistence to see that it's not going to be easy. Product like social finance and third sector capital had been part of, but that it's so worthwhile when you get it done, and you're able to look at JVS Boston and Jerry Rubin, who runs that organization, who's helped 2,000 immigrants. So I'm talking about Navjeet's deal now. Sorry, but I mean, like,
we did it together.
We did do it together, but I mean, like, that's such a wonderful moment, right? To see like, wait, we raised money from capital that cares. We deployed it in this really evidence-based program that's helping lift people out of poverty, and it worked. And so it really is this kind of win-win. And so all those dark moments, because there will be a million, I think it's just being able to hold on to like the outcome is so worthwhile. And so for me, that's what I think about.
I would just say really very quickly, and I alluded to this before, when I started doing the social impact bond work with the Commonwealth and third sector, and Mahasa, it was my aha moment was like, oh, I'm a lawyer, like I know how to do this. And I've always been involved I've been on 1 million boards since I graduated from law school. And I get to do it in a way that has a social impact. Like, that's pretty great. So taking harkening back to the comments from a few seconds ago, like learning those hard skills, learning how to be a really good financier, lawyer, investment banker, whatever, and then taking that and using it to achieve social good it's just a joyous thing to be able to do. It really is. It's a privilege to be able to do it. And that was my moment. It's like, wait, I can make the world a better place and do it as a lawyer. It's pretty awesome. So.
Awesome. Well, thank you all for sharing those reflections. I think, especially for folks who are kind of kicking off their careers, I think it's just so helpful to hear those personal experiences firsthand and those aha moments and those words of wisdom. So definitely appreciate you all sharing your stories, and thanks for allowing me to be a part of this conversation.
Thank you, Miranda.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yep, thanks, Miranda, and thank you, everyone. It was a great discussion, very insightful and inspiring. So just want to plug to everyone that we'll be moving into our last session for the day, which is the closing remarks, starting with a great video from Michelle Wu, and then finishing with some reflection from our faculty advisor, Mark Bernfeld. So thanks, everyone, again, for attending this Women in Impact Investing session and for all our speakers and panelists. So hope you all have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Bye.